The day my son told me he wanted to control my money, I didn't argue. I simply smiled, nodded, and poured him another cup of coffee the same way I used to when he was a little boy who still needed me. What Ethan didn't know was that by the time he reached for my hand and said, "It's for your own good, Mom," I had already made a decision that would change both our lives forever. No couch, no TV, no framed pictures on the walls. I had sold them all that morning. Ethan burst into the kitchen, his face pale. "Mom, what did you do? Where's the furniture? The TV? Where's everything?" I looked up calmly. "I sold some things," I said, my voice steady. "I needed the money. Since you'll be handling my finances soon, I thought I should have some cash of my own." The color drained from his face, then returned in a furious red flush. He hesitated, searching for words. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I studied his face. The arrogance was gone. What was left was a man stripped bare, haunted by his own choices. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, "but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to make things right. I started volunteering at the shelter downtown. I'm paying back the money, bit by bit." I didn't answer. He swallowed hard. "I was angry, Mom. Not at you, at myself, at the life I thought I deserved but never earned. You worked yourself sick for me, and instead of being grateful, I resented you for it. I'm sorry." The words hung between us, fragile as glass. For a long time I said nothing. Then I whispered, "I loved you more than anything, Ethan. But love isn't supposed to destroy you. You took everything good I gave you and turned it into an excuse to take more. Do you understand what that did to me?" Tears filled his eyes. "I do now." He sighed. "Then maybe there's hope for you after all." We stood in silence for a while. The garden smelled of earth and sunlight. Birds sang softly somewhere in the distance. Finally, I said, "I can't forget what you did, but I can pray you find your way back to yourself. That's all a mother can do." He nodded slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. When he left, I watched his car disappear down the road. I didn't cry this time. My tears had already done their work. That night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the fragile peace of pretending things were fine, but the deep, solid kind that comes from truth. I had spent my whole life believing my worth was tied to how much I gave, but in losing almost everything, I discovered something new. I was still whole, even without him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. When people hear my story, they often ask if I ever truly forgave my son. The truth is, forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a slow unraveling, a quiet decision you make every morning when you wake up and choose peace over pain. For a long time, I carried guilt heavier than the betrayal itself. I kept asking myself where I went wrong, what I could have done differently to make Ethan better, kinder, wiser. But one day, I realized something that changed everything. A mother's love can raise a child, but it cannot rewrite his choices. Love can guide, but it cannot control. And that's not failure, that's life. I spent 62 years trying to protect everyone but myself. I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing until there was nothing left. Now, I know that being a good mother sometimes means letting go, letting your children face their consequences, letting your own heart rest. Ethan still calls sometimes. We talk, not as mother and child bound by guilt, but as two human beings learning how to exist honestly again. He's trying to rebuild, and I'm learning to trust myself enough to believe that I deserve peace. Maybe that's what healing looks like, not the return of what you lost, but the acceptance that you can live beautifully without it. To every woman listening to my story, especially the mothers who've given until they're empty, please hear me. You are not weak for loving deeply. You are not foolish for trusting your child. And you are never too old to start over. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is draw a line and say, enough. Protect your heart the way you've protected everyone else's. Because your worth doesn't fade when your children grow up. It doesn't disappear when they turn away. It lives inside you, in the hands that built homes, in the eyes that saw through darkness, in the strength that keeps beating even when the world goes quiet. If my story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own voice, then stay with me, because somewhere there's another mother who needs to hear she's not alone, and together we can remind her. So don't forget to follow along, to keep listening, and to keep believing not just in love, but in yourself. Because sometimes the quietest women carry the loudest truths, and when they finally speak, the world listens. You sold everything? Without telling me? His tone sharp, possessive, stung more than the words themselves. Sophie stepped forward, her arms crossed, her perfect nails glinting under the kitchen light. Margaret, this is really irresponsible. We come here every week to spend time with you, and now the place looks like a storage unit. It's selfish, honestly. Selfish. The word struck me like ice water down my spine. I had worked double shifts for years to give Ethan the life he had. I had given up dreams, relationships, even health, all so he could stand there now judging me for selling my own belongings. You come here every week, I said slowly, but you don't come to spend time with me. You come to eat. Ethan's expression hardened. That's not fair, Mom. We're the only family you have. We're trying to help you. Help me? I laughed quietly. By taking my money? By calling me selfish for selling my own furniture? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't understand. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe you shouldn't be handling money on your own anymore. The words sank like stones into my chest. I stared at him, really stared, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger, someone who had already decided that my life, my choices, my independence were his to manage. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Ethan blinked, taken aback. Excuse me? There's no dinner tonight, I continued. No dinner, no conversation. If you're hungry, there are plenty of restaurants open. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sophie let out a short, bitter laugh. Wow. After everything we do for you, Ethan's jaw tightened. Be careful, Mom, he said, his voice suddenly cold. A woman your age, alone, without family looking out for her, it can end badly. Remember that. He left then, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. When the sound of their car faded, I sat in the quiet house, the same chair, the same table, but a different kind of silence. I waited for the tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I saw things clearly. My son didn't love me. Not really. I was convenience, a meal, a bank account. And so I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood. The sale of my furniture wasn't a mistake. It was a test, and Ethan had failed it spectacularly. That night, as the moonlight touched the bare walls of my living room, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't try to fix what couldn't be fixed. I would wait. And when the time came, I would show Ethan exactly who his mother really was, a woman who had built her life from ashes before, and who could do it again without him. Because when a mother's love turns into betrayal, she doesn't break. She transforms. There was a time when I believed love was enough, that the sheer force of a mother's devotion could shape a child's heart into something good, something kind. But love, I've learned, isn't always protection. Sometimes it's the blindfold we wear while walking straight into heartbreak. Ethan was born on a cold, rainy night in March 34 years ago. His father, Richard, was supposed to be there, holding my hand. But at the last minute, he didn't show up. Later, I'd find out he'd been halfway to another state, chasing some new dream, some new woman, I don't even remember which. What I do remember is the moment I held my son for the first time, tiny, wrinkled, his fists clenched, as if ready to fight the world. I promised him right there that he'd never lack anything, even if it meant I'd have to go without. For a while, it was just the two of us in a small apartment, above a laundromat, in a quiet town outside Chicago. The smell of detergent filled the air every night, and the floor creaked whenever the dryers spun below. I used to rock Ethan to sleep in a squeaky old chair by the window. Sometimes, when the bills piled up on the counter, I'd whisper promises into his soft hair, promises that things would get better, that Mommy would figure it out, that one day he'd be proud of me. I worked at a local insurance office during the day, earning just enough to pay rent and groceries. Because when a mother is betrayed by the child she loves most, she doesn't fight back with anger, she plans in silence. Subscribe for more stories like mine. You won't want to miss what happens next. It started on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind that slips quietly through the week, unnoticed, until something happens that makes you remember it forever. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, when Ethan came over. He didn't knock, as usual. He had a key. But when Ethan turned 3, I picked up a second job cleaning offices at night. I'd come home around 6 in the evening, feed him, give him a bath, and tuck him into bed before heading back out again. My neighbor, Mrs. Clark, an older widow with kind eyes, watched him for $10 a night. I remember her telling me once, "You'll burn yourself out, Margaret." But I'd just smile and say, "Mothers don't get to burn out." Years blurred together like one long shift that never ended. I missed school plays, class trips, and parent meetings, but I always showed up for the important moments: his birthdays, his graduations, the nights he cried because other kids had nicer shoes. I remember that one vividly. He must have been around 10. He came home from school, tossed his backpack on the floor, and asked why he couldn't have the same sneakers the other boys wore. They cost over $100, nearly what I earned in a week cleaning offices. Still, that weekend, I bought them. I ate rice and beans for almost a month, but seeing the way his face lit up when he opened that box, it made everything worth it. Or so I thought. When Ethan turned 18, he got into a private university. It cost $15,000 a year, money I wouldn't have in a lifetime. But I found a way. I walked into the bank, signed the loan papers, and walked out with a debt that would follow me for a decade. 10 years of paying every month, watching interest pile up like bricks on my shoulders. But I told myself it was an investment in him, in his future, in the man I believed he'd become. He graduated with honors. I remember that day so clearly. The sun was bright, the air smelled like summer, and when he crossed the stage, I cried harder than I had in years. He hugged me afterward, and I thought, this is it. All those long nights, all those sacrifices, they were worth it. Ethan found a job soon after, a good one. He started earning double what I did in my best years. I was proud. I thought he'd finally stand on his own. But instead of moving out, he asked if he could stay a little longer, to save money for a house. I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said. "This is your home." He stayed for 5 years. 5 long years during which I still paid every bill, cooked every meal, and cleaned up after him while he saved every penny of his salary. When he finally moved out, it wasn't to rent. It was to buy a house outright, $200,000, cash. He called me the day he signed the papers. "Can you believe it, Mom?" he said. "I'm a homeowner." And I remember laughing through tears. I told him how proud I was. I didn't mention that while he was saving, I had quietly fallen behind on my own payments, that I'd skipped doctor visits and stopped buying new clothes just to keep things afloat. Because that's what mothers do. We celebrate our children, even when their victories come at our own expense. 2 years later, Ethan got married. Sophie was different. Beautiful, yes. Polished, sophisticated. She came from a family that vacationed in Aspen and drank wine I couldn't pronounce. From the start, I could tell she looked at me the way people look at old furniture, useful, but outdated. At the wedding, I sat at a table near the back, far from the main family seats. When I asked Ethan about it, he smiled apologetically and said, "We had to give those tables to some clients, Mom. You understand, right?" Of course, I understood. I always did. After they married, Ethan's visits grew less frequent. Once a week became once a month, then once every few weeks. When he did come, he always had Sophie in tow. She'd sit on her phone during dinner, smiling politely but never asking how I was. Eventually, they started showing up only on Friday nights. Always around dinner time, always unannounced, always expecting a full meal. At first, I didn't mind. I thought, maybe this is how he shows love. Maybe food is our connection. I'd cook his favorite dishes: pot roast, mac and cheese, cornbread, apple pie. I'd set the table like it was Thanksgiving. Light candles, fold the napkins just right. But as months passed, I noticed something. They never brought anything. No wine, no dessert, not even a loaf of bread. Not once did they say thank you. One night after they left, I sat at the kitchen table and added up the cost of the meal, $45. $45 I didn't really have to spend. I realized that to them, I had become a Friday night convenience, a free restaurant with a sentimental name, Mom's House. Then came my 60th birthday. I had baked my own cake because I didn't want to spend the evening alone. He walked in like he owned the place, his shoes clicking against the hardwood floor I had polished earlier that morning. He smiled, that confident practice smile that used to make me proud before I realized it wasn't kindness behind it, but calculation. He sat across from me, opened his laptop, and began talking as if he had rehearsed the whole thing. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking. You're 62 now, and I just want to make sure everything's organized." I waited for Ethan all afternoon. He finally showed up 2 hours late. No gift, no card. "Sorry, traffic was awful," he said, cutting himself a slice before even hugging me. He stayed 20 minutes, then left, saying Sophie wasn't feeling well. When the door closed, I stared at the half-eaten cake, then at the empty chair across from me, and for the first time in my life, I let myself cry. That was when the cracks began to show, not in Ethan, but in me. I had built my entire world around the idea that motherhood meant endless giving, that love meant sacrifice without limit. I'd believed that one day he'd see it all and give it back in kindness. But that night, as I washed the dishes from my own birthday dinner, something inside me broke. From that day forward, I started noticing things I had ignored before: the way Ethan would roll his eyes when I asked for help with heavy groceries, the way Sophie would sigh when I called her name. I began to understand that my silence had become their permission. Every time I said nothing, I taught them that my boundaries didn't exist. So when Ethan came to me with his proposal about managing my money, maybe it wasn't out of nowhere. Maybe it was the logical next step for someone who had grown used to taking and never being told no. But he made one mistake. He underestimated me. He thought I was still the mother who would give everything just to keep him close. What he didn't realize was that I had been preparing for years, saving quietly, paying attention, learning how to protect myself. He thought he was dealing with the same tired old woman he'd been feeding lies to for years. He didn't know I was done being silent. He didn't know that behind my soft smiles and quiet nods, something inside me had already begun to awaken, something fierce, something unbreakable. The Monday after that tense Friday dinner, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet except for the slow ticking of the wall clock. My kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner, the scent I'd always associated with peace. But there was no peace in me that morning. Only questions that wouldn't let me rest. Ethan had said he wanted to take care of my money, that it would be easier if my paychecks went through him. But easier for who? The thought gnawed at me until I finally decided I needed answers. By 8 o'clock, I was standing at my local bank, still wearing my old gray coat and holding my handbag tight against my chest. The young teller smiled politely when I stepped forward. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins. How can I help you today? I'd like to see my account history, please. For the past 6 months." She nodded, clicked away at her keyboard, and soon handed me several printed pages. "Here you go. Do you want to review them here?" "Yes, please," I said. I sat down at the small desk near the window and unfolded the papers, running my finger line by line. My eyes moved slowly at first, then faster, scanning for anything that didn't make sense. And there it was. A cash withdrawal, $1,200 made 3 months ago at a branch across town. I felt my heart pound in my ears. I hadn't been to that branch in years. My debit card had never left my purse. "Excuse me," I said, walking back to the teller's counter. "Can you tell me where this transaction was made? Who processed it?" She typed for a moment, then frowned slightly. "It was withdrawn using your card, Mrs. Collins. The system shows it was done in person." "In person?" I repeated. But the image flashed in my mind. Ethan, sitting in my living room that afternoon 3 months ago. I had been in the shower when he arrived. I told him to let himself in. My purse had been on the coffee table, right next to him. A chill spread down my arms. "Is there a way to see the camera footage from that day?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You'd have to file a formal request," she explained gently. "And possibly a police report." I thanked her, took the papers, and left. Outside, the sun was too bright, the air too cold. I felt dizzy, like the world had tilted slightly off its axis. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and laid out the papers. My mind was racing. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Ethan had needed the money for something important and just forgot to tell me. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My son, the same boy I had fed and clothed, the boy who once held my hand crossing the street, wouldn't steal from me. Would he? That night, I didn't file the report. Not yet. I needed to be sure. "You shouldn't be stressing over bills or banks anymore. Starting next month, we're going to transfer your paychecks to my account. I'll take care of everything for you." He said it so casually, like he was offering to fix a broken faucet or mow the lawn. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "Transfer my money?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. He nodded, sipping his coffee, completely at ease. "Yes, Mom. It's just simpler. You won't have to deal with statements or payments." The next few days, I searched through my old boxes, tax records, statements, receipts, every document I'd saved over the years. It felt like sifting through the ruins of my own life, one paper at a time. And then I found a letter from my insurance company from 2 years ago. I'd forgotten about it. Back when I was hospitalized for pneumonia, they had informed me my coverage was nearly maxed out because of additional consultations. I hadn't thought much about it then, just assumed there'd been a clerical error. But now, reading that letter again, something inside me froze. Those consultations had happened at clinics I'd never been to. My hand shook as I pulled out more papers. Bills, statements, another letter, all showing services under my name that I hadn't used. Someone had been using my insurance. I sat there, surrounded by evidence that didn't feel real. Each paper whispered the same ugly truth. Someone had been pretending to be me, and I didn't need to ask who. Ethan had borrowed my ID once, years ago, claiming he needed it to pick up a package. I had given it to him without a thought. I remember his laugh, casual and reassuring. "Relax, Mom. I'll bring it right back." I had smiled then. Trusting. Foolish. Now, that memory tasted bitter. I picked up the phone and called the insurance company. The woman on the other end spoke kindly but carefully, as if choosing each word. Mrs. Collins, we can investigate this as identity misuse. You'll need to file a sworn statement. I thanked her and hung up. My hand was trembling so badly, I had to steady it against the table. But it didn't stop there. That night, I went through my mail again, bills, flyers, advertisements, and noticed something I had overlooked before. A credit card statement from a bank I didn't recognize. The letter had my name printed clearly at the top. The balance, $3,000. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't applied for any new credit cards in years. I called the number listed. After several minutes of being transferred between departments, a representative finally confirmed it. The card had been opened 18 months ago. Can you tell me what the purchases were for? I asked. She listed them off. Hardware stores, furniture shops, electronics. I didn't need to hear more. I already knew. 2 years ago, Ethan and Sophie had bought their house. They'd remodeled it completely. New appliances, new flooring, a sleek entertainment system. I had admired it when I first saw it. Sophie had said, "We got everything on sale," laughing lightly. I remember thinking how lucky they were. Now I realized it hadn't been luck. It had been me. For a long while, I just sat there on the floor of my living room, surrounded by papers, evidence of betrayal so deep it hollowed me out. My throat burned with unshed tears. It wasn't the money. It was what it meant. My own son had stolen my name, my identity, my trust, everything. When I finally stood up, my knees ached, but my resolve was clear. I wasn't going to confront him yet. Not without proof. Not without a plan. Because I knew how he'd react, calm, dismissive, maybe even condescending. He'd say I was confused, that I was old, that I was imagining things. He'd twist my words until I doubted my own memory. He'd done it before, in smaller ways. This time, I wouldn't give him that chance. That Friday, when Ethan came by for dinner, I acted as if nothing was wrong. I cooked his favorite dish, chicken with mushroom sauce, the one I used to make when he was sad as a child. He and Sophie arrived right on time, all smiles. Sophie greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Smells delicious, Margaret. You always outdo yourself." I smiled faintly. "I try." They sat, ate, talked about their week. Ethan told stories about his job, about how exhausting it was managing irresponsible clients. I listened quietly, studying him. Every time he laughed, I saw the man he'd become: confident, charming, utterly sure of himself. The kind of man who thought he could do anything and get away with it. When they finished eating, Ethan pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and placed them on the table beside his empty plate. "Mom," he said, "I brought the forms for the account transfers. It's all straightforward, just needs your signature. You can sign here, here, and here." I looked at the papers. Bank authorization forms. Legal language filled the pages in tiny print. I scanned them carefully, my heart pounding. "I'll handle your expenses, and you'll never have to worry again. It's for your own good, for my own good." Those 4 words echoed in my chest like a quiet alarm. I studied his face. The boy I once carried through sleepless nights had grown into a man who spoke like a financial advisor reading from a script. I wanted to believe he meant well, but something in his eyes, a flicker too sharp, too confident, made me hesitate. Still, I smiled. "That sounds fine, Ethan," I said softly. "This says you'd have complete access to my account," I said softly. "Exactly," he said. "That way I can manage everything efficiently. It's just practical." "Practical for who?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He only smiled, sliding a pen toward me. For a long moment, I stared at that pen. My hand twitched. Every instinct I'd built over years of motherhood, the instinct to trust, to accommodate, to avoid conflict, urged me to sign, but something stronger rose up inside me. I set the pen down. "Let me think about it," I said, "for just a fraction of a second." Irritation flashed in his eyes before he smoothed it away with another smile. Of course, Mom. Take a few days. You'll see it's the best thing for you. He left the papers behind when they went home that night, confident I'd sign them anyway. But as I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at those pages under the soft light, I felt a clarity sharper than fear. I wasn't confused. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being manipulated. And that realization, that clean, cutting truth, was the first moment I stopped being afraid. That night, I opened my old notebook and started writing everything down: dates, amounts, account numbers, details. I gathered every letter, every statement, every scrap of evidence. If Ethan thought I was weak, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had a folder full of documents and a new purpose beating in my chest. He had taken my trust. Now I was taking back my power. The morning after I gathered the papers, I stood by my kitchen window, watching the sunlight crawl across the faded linoleum floor. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. Angry, yes, but it was a clean kind of anger, the kind that sharpens your vision and gives you back your spine. I poured myself a cup of coffee, took a deep breath, and said out loud to no one, "It's time." I had no idea where to start, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. So that morning, I called the number printed on a flyer I'd seen pinned to the grocery store's bulletin board the week before. It advertised free legal consultations for seniors. I didn't know what to expect, but something told me to trust that instinct. The office was small, tucked between a laundromat and a thrift store downtown. The sign read, "William Sanchez, Attorney at Law." Inside, it smelled faintly of old books and coffee. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled when I told her I didn't have an appointment. "That's all right, sweetheart," she said. "He always keeps time open for walk-ins, especially mothers with that look." "What look?" I asked, forcing a small laugh. "The look of someone who's been hurt, but is finally ready to do something about it." A few minutes later, Mr. Sanchez appeared. He was in his 50s, his hair streaked with gray, his tie a little crooked, but his handshake was firm, and his voice carried a quiet steadiness that made me feel safe enough to talk. He gestured for me to sit and said, "Now, Mrs. Collins, tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the bank withdrawals, the fraudulent credit card, the fake insurance claims, the electricity bill in my name. I told him about the papers Ethan had brought over, and the way he spoke to me, like I was a child who needed supervision. I didn't spare a single detail. He listened the way good men do, silently, attentively, without a trace of judgment. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands together, and sighed. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "what your son has done is financial fraud and identity theft. If you had signed those papers, he could have emptied your accounts, taken loans in your name, and there would have been nothing you could do about it." The words hit me like stones. "I knew it," I whispered. "I knew something wasn't right." He nodded gently. "You're not crazy. You're not confused. You're a victim of someone who took advantage of your trust." My throat tightened. I blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. "He's my son," I said softly, almost to myself. "Even sons can commit crimes," Mr. Sanchez replied quietly. "And love doesn't erase wrongdoing. It just makes it harder to face." He outlined a plan: file a fraud report with the bank, dispute the charges with the credit card company, and file a sworn statement with my insurance. "You should also consider a restraining order," he said carefully, "in case he tries to pressure you again." "A restraining order?" I repeated, almost laughing. "If it makes things easier for you?" His lips curved into that triumphant little grin that only sons who think they've outsmarted their mothers wear. He stood up, kissed me quickly on the forehead, mechanical, impersonal, and said, "It's the right choice, Mom. You'll thank me later." When the door closed behind him, I sat there for a long while, staring at the half-empty coffee cup he'd left on the table. For your own good. Those words lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Against my own child? Against someone who's stealing from you? He corrected. Whether that person is a stranger or family doesn't change what's happening. I left the office with a folder full of forms and a mind buzzing with instructions. I wasn't sure I had the courage to go through with it, but then I thought of Ethan's voice saying, "It's for your own good," and something inside me hardened. By the end of that day, I had changed all my passwords, requested a new debit card, and frozen my credit. The bank manager, a woman about my age, patted my hand and said, "You're doing the right thing." That night, I sat in my kitchen again, staring at the folder from Mr. Sanchez. For years, I had thought that power belonged to men, to employers, to landlords, to the people who always seemed to know more than I did. But sitting there, surrounded by papers that finally told the truth, I realized that power had been mine all along. I'd just forgotten how to use it. The next evening, the phone rang. Ethan's number flashed on the screen. For a moment, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," he said. His tone was tight, clipped. "We need to talk. Come to dinner at our place tomorrow. We need to sort this out." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. "I can't tomorrow," I said calmly. "I'm busy." "Busy? With what?" His laugh was sharp, almost mocking. "Come on, Mom. This is important. Maybe for you," I replied. "For me, other things matter more right now." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear his breathing, uneven, as if he was trying to understand what was happening. "You're acting strange," he said finally. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this attitude isn't helping. You need to stop being so stubborn and sign those papers. This is for your own good." Those words again. For your own good. I almost smiled. "Ethan," I said, my voice calm but steady, "we need to talk about something else, about the money that's disappeared from my account, about the credit card in my name, about the insurance charges and the electricity bill at your house." The silence that followed was absolute. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. His voice was still even, but I could hear the fear creeping in beneath the surface. "I think you do," I said quietly. "And I think you should be careful with your next words. Because I've already spoken to a lawyer." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "You what?" "I've spoken to a lawyer, Ethan. He explained everything you've done and what it means legally." "Mom," he said, his tone rising, "you can't be serious. You're confused. You don't know what's going on. Maybe this lawyer's taking advantage of you." "I'm not confused," I interrupted. "And I'm not being taken advantage of. I have documents, transactions, dates, evidence. I know exactly what's been happening." For a moment, all I heard was his breathing fast, uneven, almost angry. Then his voice dropped low and cold. "You'd really do this to your own son?" "No, Ethan," I said. "You did this to yourself." He laughed bitterly. "You're insane, completely insane. I don't know what that lawyer told you, but he's filling your head with nonsense. After everything I've done for you, all the dinners you came to eat for free?" I interrupted sharply. "All the times I asked for help and you were too busy? Those are the things you've done for me?" His breath hitched. I could almost picture him pacing, jaw clenched. "You know what, Mom?" he said finally. "You'll regret this. You're turning your back on your own family." And then the line went dead. For a long moment, I just stared at the phone in my hand. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. Something far stronger was taking root inside me. For the first time in years, I had spoken, without hesitation, without guilt, without bending myself to make him comfortable. That night, I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that feels like healing. When I woke the next morning, sunlight poured through my window, and I felt something new, a sense of direction. I knew what I had to do next. After breakfast, I put on my coat and walked back to Mr. Sanchez's office. I want to move forward, I told him. File whatever needs to be filed. I'm ready. He nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. Then let's get started. We spent hours organizing documents, scanning copies, signing statements. When I left his office that day, I wasn't just a frightened mother anymore. I was a woman reclaiming her life. I had heard them before, from doctors, from supervisors, from men who believed they knew better, but never from my own son. That night, I didn't sleep. The clock ticked through the silence as I stared at the ceiling, my heart twisting with an ache I couldn't name. Was this what motherhood turned into giving, sacrificing, until even your own child decided he had the right to take control? The next evening, I decided to keep everything as normal as possible. That afternoon, I came home, brewed tea, and sat at the same kitchen table where Ethan had once demanded control. I looked around my nearly empty house, the bare walls, the quiet rooms, and for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like mine. That night, as I turned off the lights and stood in the dark, I whispered to myself, "He took my money, my name, my trust. But he'll never take my dignity." Because no matter how much a mother sacrifices, there comes a day when she must stop protecting her child and start protecting herself. And that day had finally come. The next few days felt like walking through fog, quiet, heavy, and full of something I couldn't quite see yet. Ethan didn't call again, not right away. I suppose he thought silence would make me nervous, that I'd start doubting myself without his voice filling the space. But he didn't understand something vital. Silence, once terrifying to me, had become my shield. I used that silence. I spent those days carefully combing through every folder, every receipt, every letter I had stored over the years. I wanted to be certain bulletproof before whatever came next. And it didn't take long for the next thing to arrive. On Thursday afternoon, while I was making tea, I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out the window and froze. Ethan's car was parked in my driveway. Sophie was in the passenger seat, her sunglasses perched on top of her head like a crown. I could see from the way they moved quick, determined that this wasn't a friendly visit. The doorbell rang once, then again, then 3 times, louder each time. I took my time walking to the door. My heart was steady, surprisingly calm. When I opened it, I didn't step aside. I stood in the doorway, blocking their way. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied. He frowned. "Inside. This isn't a conversation for the hallway." "Then you can speak from there," I said evenly. "Whatever you need to say, you can say it here." Sophie let out a sharp exhale, clearly annoyed. "This is ridiculous, Margaret. You're acting paranoid. We're trying to help you, and you're treating us like strangers." I smiled faintly. "You are strangers." Ethan's jaw tensed. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't recognize the person standing in front of me anymore." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You've been talking to people, lawyers, banks. Do you realize what kind of trouble you're starting?" "I didn't start anything," I said. "You did." "Stop being dramatic," he snapped. "You're overreacting. You've misunderstood everything. I've been managing things for your benefit." "For my benefit?" I laughed quietly. "Do you mean the credit card opened in my name? The utility bills under my identity? The money withdrawn from my account without permission? Or maybe the insurance claims you made while I was in the hospital?" He froze for a second, just a flicker of shock, but it was enough. His composure cracked like glass. "I don't know what you think you found," he said quickly, "but you're mistaken. Someone must have." "Spare me the lies," I interrupted, my voice cold. "I've seen everything. I have copies, statements, even the bank confirmations. And I've already filed official reports. Sophie's face turned pale. What? You heard me, I said calmly. Everything is documented. Everything is in the hands of the law now. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Ethan took another step forward, his voice rising. Do you know what you're doing? You're ruining my life. You're going to destroy everything I've worked for. Worked for? I repeated softly. You mean what you stole? He looked at me like he wanted to shout but couldn't find the words. Finally, he said, almost spitting the words, You owe me. He blinked. Excuse me? My entire life, he said, pointing at me, his voice trembling with fury. I grew up without a father. I had to watch you work yourself to death. I missed out on things, on vacations, on experiences other kids had because you couldn't afford them. You chose to have me. You chose that life. So yes, you owe me. For a moment, I just stared at him. My son, the baby I had held, the boy I had protected, was standing in front of me justifying theft, as if my sacrifices had been debts he was collecting with interest. No, Ethan, I said softly but firmly. I don't owe you anything. I gave you everything I had. What you did with it was your choice, but you don't get to take what's left. Sophie grabbed his arm. Let's go, she said quickly. This isn't helping. But Ethan shook her off. It was Friday, which meant Ethan and his wife, Sophie, would come over for dinner. They always did. It had become a ritual over the past 3 years, one I'd once cherished. But lately, it had begun to feel more like an obligation, a performance. I cooked as I always did, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie for dessert. At exactly 6:30, I heard the sound of their car pulling into the driveway. The familiar rhythm of their footsteps echoed up the porch. You think you can embarrass me? You think you can destroy my name? You'll regret this. He stormed off the porch, slamming the car door so hard the sound echoed down the quiet street. Sophie followed, throwing one last look over her shoulder, a mixture of contempt and fear. When they drove away, I stood there for a long moment, the wind cold against my face. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply turned, locked the door, and whispered to myself, let him rage. The truth will stand. That night, my phone rang again. Ethan's number. I didn't answer. Then it rang again, and again. He left voicemails, first calm, then pleading, then angry. Mom, this is a misunderstanding. Please call me back. Mom, I'm begging you, don't do this. You're making a mistake. Fine. If you want a war, you'll get one. By the 5th voicemail, I had stopped listening. I sat quietly in bed, the phone glowing on the nightstand, and realized something extraordinary. I wasn't afraid anymore. The next morning, Mr. Sanchez called. Mrs. Collins, he said, I've submitted your claims to the bank and the insurance. The fraud reports are now active. The authorities will contact you if they need statements. Thank you, I said. What happens next? Now, he replied. We wait. And we prepare. And so, I did. The waiting wasn't easy. Each day brought a mix of peace and tension. Peace from taking action. Tension from not knowing what Ethan would do next. I avoided going out much, except for errands. But the neighbors noticed things. People talk in small towns. They always do. One afternoon, as I was tending the small patch of flowers by my porch, my neighbor, Mrs. Grant, called out from across the fence. Margaret, everything all right? Haven't seen Ethan around lately. I smiled faintly. He's busy, I said. She gave me a knowing look. Busy or in trouble? I hesitated, then said simply, both. She nodded, as if she already knew. Well, honey, you just do what you need to. Sons forget that mothers have limits too. That night, I received an email from the bank confirming something that made my chest tighten, not with fear, but vindication. The investigation had confirmed multiple unauthorized withdrawals. The funds would be reimbursed, pending further review. I forwarded the message to Mr. Sanchez. His reply came minutes later. Good. This strengthens your case. Be prepared once your son realizes what's happening. He'll try to reach you again. He was right. 2 days later, I heard another car pull into my driveway. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Ethan got out, alone this time. His face was drawn, pale, his usual confidence replaced by something desperate. He knocked once softly, almost politely. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "Please, we need to fix this. You can't let this go to court." "And sec. Why not?" I asked. "Afraid of what they'll find?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I made mistakes, okay? But I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you owed me for everything. I thought you'd understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You thought love meant permission." He looked down, his hands trembling. "I'll pay you back. Whatever I took, I'll fix it. It's not about the money, Ethan," I said quietly. "It's about respect, and you can't buy that back." For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew, lost, scared, unsure. But then his expression hardened again. "You're really going to destroy your own son's life over this?" "No," I said. "You already did that." He stared at me for a long time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. As his car disappeared down the street, I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me. It wasn't happiness, it was closure. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the moonlight spilling across the table, and whispered, "You wanted control, Ethan. Now I have mine." I thought about all the years I had lived for him, for his comfort, his approval, his love. But now, for the first time, I was living for myself. And though I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, I knew this much. I would face it standing tall, no longer a silent mother begging for kindness, but a woman who had reclaimed her voice. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early spring. The kind of morning where the world looks clean again after a long rain's sunlight glinting off wet pavement, trees trembling softly in the breeze. I remember standing outside the courthouse that day, holding my purse against my chest, feeling the weight of 62 years pressing down on me. The key turned in the lock, the same key I had foolishly given Ethan years ago, and then the front door creaked open. But instead of cheerful greetings, I heard Sophie scream. It wasn't the kind of scream that comes from fear, it was the sharp, indignant cry of someone shocked by inconvenience. "Ethan, what happened? Where's everything?" I didn't move. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands folded on my lap. The living room was empty, completely empty. Not the years themselves, but everything inside them, the nights I'd worked myself to exhaustion, the tears I'd swallowed, the love I'd given without asking anything in return. Mr. Sanchez met me at the steps, a calm smile on his face. "Are you ready, Mrs. Collins?" "I've been ready for a long time," I said. And I meant it. Inside, the courthouse smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. The benches were wooden, the walls a dull beige that made everyone look tired. I sat near the front, my hands clasped in my lap. Across the room, Ethan walked in, wearing his best suit. He looked thinner, older, his usual confidence dulled. Sophie wasn't with him. For the first time, he looked small. When his eyes met mine, something flickered there, not love, not even anger. Shame, maybe, or fear. The judge entered, and the hearing began. The bank representative presented their findings, first records of unauthorized withdrawals, traced directly to Ethan's account. Then the insurance company's investigator spoke, confirming the fraudulent claims filed under my name. Every word felt like a pin striking glass, cracking the illusion my son had built. When it was Ethan's turn, he stood, his hands trembling slightly. "Your Honor," he began, "my mother misunderstood. I wasn't stealing from her, I was managing her finances. She's been having memory issues, and I was trying to protect her from making mistakes." I felt a cold wave roll through me. That was his defense to call me senile, confused, incapable. Mr. Sanchez stood up. "Mrs. Collins," he said gently, "could you please tell the court how you discovered the transactions?" I rose slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. "I discovered them by accident," I said. But the moment I saw the withdrawals, I knew exactly what had happened. Because I've known my son his entire life. I know the tone he uses when he's hiding something. I know the look in his eyes when he's lying. I turned toward Ethan. He wouldn't meet my gaze. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice. I continued. I gave him everything I had. I paid for his education, his car, his first home. I told myself that was what mothers were supposed to do, to give and keep giving. But what I didn't realize was that when you give too much, you teach people how to take without guilt. My son didn't become a thief overnight. I helped him become one by never saying no. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked moved. "I'm not here for revenge," I said softly. "I'm here because I need to stand up for myself, maybe for the first time in my life." When I sat back down, I felt something loosen inside me, a knot that had been there for decades. Ethan's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering furiously, but he only shook his head. When it was his turn again, he spoke quietly. "I just wanted to make sure she was taken care of," he said. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." But the evidence was clear. The judge reviewed everything: the bank records, the insurance claims, the credit reports, and ruled in my favor. Ethan was found guilty of financial misconduct and ordered to repay every cent, along with community service hours and counseling for rehabilitation. When the gavel struck, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and breathed. Justice didn't feel triumphant, it felt quiet, like a door finally closing after years of noise. Outside, the sunlight was brighter than before. Mr. Sanchez walked beside me as we left the courthouse. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Lighter," I said. "Like I can finally breathe." He nodded. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Collins. Most people wouldn't have had the courage." "Courage," I murmured. "I used to think mothers were born with it. Turns out, we have to earn it." And that night, I sat by my window again, watching the last traces of sunset fade into violet. The house was still mostly empty. I never bought back the furniture I'd sold. But somehow, I didn't mind the space. It felt honest. It felt mine. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, life began to settle. I planted tomatoes in the backyard, started taking morning walks, even joined a small book club at the library. I began to rediscover pieces of myself. I'd forgotten the woman who once loved music, who used to paint before motherhood swallowed her time. One afternoon, while I was tending the garden, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there was Ethan. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I stood up, wiping dirt from my gloves. "If it's about money, Ethan, there's nothing left to say." He shook his head. "No, it's not about money.